Hello and welcome to the Practitioner podcast. This is a podcast from us at Renaissance. We're a network of missional practitioners and microchurches in the greater Boston area. Every episode, we talk about themes around living on mission and living in microchurch community. We hope our conversations always touch on the practical, the realities of everyday, ordinary people. And this is because our mission is about cultivating beautiful kingdom people embedded in the everyday stuff of life. My name is Christine Lee, and I am back. And I'm with the one and only
Drew Thurman.
Drew, I've missed being on the podcast. How was it, though, living out peak alpha male culture? Just a bunch of bros doing podcasts.
I was waiting for that comment to come. Yes.
There's nothing like a man on a podcast. We just don't have enough of them.
It was good. I really missed getting to talk and to banter with you. And I have to confess, I think a couple of the episodes are obviously awesome, including the interview we did with Steve in the last episode. But my wife a couple of times started to listen and she was like, oh no, I'm sorry. I'm not listening to, if Christine's not on, I'm not going to listen to a couple of dudes talk for an hour. I'm out.
I love that energy. Stand with women.
Yeah.
Love it, Bree.
Yeah.
Okay. But I do think that this is actually a good segue because we are going to be talking about some of these dynamics. We're actually just talking about alpha males for the next 53 minutes. Just kidding. But we are going to talk about gender and life phase today. However, before we get into that, I feel it would be fun, since both of us grew up in church and worked in churches, to talk about like the strangest rules or experiences related to gender being in these types of spaces. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to start? Because
I'm going to say, I'm sure you've got one queued up, so let's hear this.
Okay, this was one of
it's like, do you just have like a Rolodex of stories?
Yeah. Well, not a Rolodex, but definitely a running note on my phone. Just kidding. I have these stored as like trauma in my body instead. One of the last church I worked at was probably like the most strangely stringent about essentially like the Billy Graham rule. And if people don't know the Billy Graham rule, it's like, if you're married and a man, never be alone with a woman. #integrity. But the last church I worked at was like really, really strict on that. Of like, it was like, if you were a person of the opposite gender, like you cannot be alone in a space with a person, including like if you're just single. So I'm like, I don't know how you're supposed to be on staff there and date, but okay. And like, I wasn't allowed to meet with other male youth pastors in the area alone.
No, really?
Unless it was in the office, and I had to have like the admin in like the office space to like watch us, essentially. And I was like, okay, I guess I don't know what that's about. But one of my favorite things was the last summer I was with them, I was contracted to speak at this youth conference. And they also wanted to bring the rest of my team out because they wanted our church to consider taking our kids to this conference. And so the other people on my team was like my male boss and then my female coworker. And I was staying for multiple nights because I was speaking multiple nights. And then they were flying back early because they were just going to see one night of the conference. And so this organization like bought all our tickets and got it all figured out. But then my male boss's boss came back and said, you have to make sure that like it looks like the tickets got booked and my two coworkers are sitting next to each other on the plane, and you have to call this conference and ask them to change the flight so that they don't sit next to each other on the plane since it's a male and female next to each other. And I was like, okay, first of all, our male boss drives us insane. So like, but also like they're probably going to sit next to somebody that is not the same gender as them on the plane anyway. Like, I don't understand the logic, but they forced me to email them and say these flight seatings need to be changed because we can't have that. We can't have that chance of home wrecking in this public flight.
Well, I'm laughing because I've been a part of some churches that not quite that legalistic with it, but have had some very similar like weird. I was just even thinking, I don't know why it never dawned on me, but like like, is no one allowed to like, if you have like a female like secretary, is like, does everyone need to enter the office at the exact same time to?
Yeah, it's a great question.
I don't know. You can get like really like weirdly down the hole. There's so many weird ones. The first, thing that came to mind is just, one of the churches I work for was very strict about, the definition of minister and, versus director if it's a female and if women could speak. But I just thought it was always hilarious that it's like almost like we didn't consider it preaching, but on Mother's Day, the pastor's wife was allowed to speak. And it was like this weird loophole that because it's Mother's Day and it's, like a topic about moms, we'll find a loophole. It'll be great.
Yeah, I've also heard of churches where they're like, women aren't allowed to speak, but the pastor's wife is because she's technically one flesh with the male pastor, so that's okay.
Yeah. We could probably spend an entire episode on the weird technicalities that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, I think you're going to kind of segue us. We sound probably a little salty, but we're actually going to be talking about something really important that is related to this topic here in a second. And for those of you who maybe are just jumping into this episode or catching up, we typically go back and forth every episode who's bringing the theme. Sometimes, as we've done recently, because Christine's been away a little bit, we host guests from our network or sometimes even outside our network, and they get to bring certain themes as well. But today, Christine, you are bringing our theme on this episode. So would you like to tell us what it is and maybe give us some background why we're talking about it and why it relates to everyday, ordinary life in microchurch and practitionership? Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about shared life in microchurch across relational status, life stage, and gender. And, I think we were being a little coy up top, but at the same time, outside of even church, there's so many ramifications for gender, for life phase, the value of whether you're single, married, whether you're a woman, whether you're a man, and the implications of that. But there's also, I think, been long-standing implications of that in church, and especially ministry, but even just life in church and what that means. And I think a lot of those rules are known, felt, but unspoken. And I think there's something to making this turn of, we always talk about being spiritual families. And, that also has implications of what does that mean for people's family of origin, how they've experienced gender in their families of origin. But I think that if we don't talk about it, it's actually pretty hard to and it can get bumpy if people aren't considering, where am I coming from in my experience of my gender and my experience of being a single person, being a married person, and what that looks like in community. And I think it's just also easy to port some of our experiences in the past and the attached morality to it into church spaces and not be thoughtful of not only what does that mean for ourselves, but how does that impact other people? Because whether they have shared some of those experiences and it's caused them harm, or they don't share those experiences, so it's very foreign and strange to them. And I think that there's the felt experience of gender inequality in our society, and we live, I think, in a very privileged society overall compared to many other societies. We live in the West, and we have so many named rights, and at the same time, I don't think we can undersell the forces that cause the experience of being a woman being very different than being a man, and then especially in church. And so I think it's just important to talk through what that means, what that looks like, be more thoughtful. And I think it's hopefully, I'm really hoping in this conversation our different vantage points and how we've navigated that and how we've navigated this turn and trying to figure out what it looks like to be in deep community with other people can inspire other people to think through not just restructuring their church experiences, but just there is something so gorgeous and life-giving to being freed from some of these confines and noticing maybe some of the things we subscribe to that aren't actually best for us or our neighbors, if that makes sense.
No, this has me really excited. And of course, I mean, you talked a little bit about, you touched on it, and we obviously did at the top of the show. We're probably not going to be spending as much time talking about leadership. We will a little bit, but that's a whole, it might be a future topic that we cover in this podcast of just trying to, there's a whole nother dynamic and complexity there. And, we want to own that as well. But I love you talked about it being shared life. So how do we, in a microchurch setting, with hopefully some diversity in terms of, again, relational status, life stage, gender, what does it look like to understand where everybody's coming from? And so I would love for you, we're going to get kind of into the weeds of this, but maybe to launch our conversation, just as a single woman in a microchurch that I know has a lot of relational status and life stage diversity in your microchurch. What do you think we need? Like, what are you considering all the time in shared life and microchurch in order for you to feel like you can fully participate, in order that you can help lead and create in that space? Like, walk us through some of what's going on in your head as you enter one of those spaces.
Yeah. Well, I think that this doesn't go without being said. It's like being respected as a full human being. And I think it's interesting because there's so much value for women to be married, and I think there is certain types of hardships of being single. Just like I actually really enjoy being single. I've never really had a problem with it. I'm not somebody, just to give like maybe some context on who I am, I'm not somebody that's always been like, oh, I just like wish I was married and it hasn't worked out. Like, I've always felt fine. Like, I'm like, I love this. I feel good. I don't feel like I live less of a life because I'm not married. And at the same time, I have been in other spaces where I've noticed the confines of, just because I am single and a woman, I'm barred from certain conversations, or I am, like, people are uncomfortable for me being present. And I think it's made a huge difference. I have never felt that one time in our microchurch, and there's just so much respect of, like, you aren't, like, less of a human being because you don't have kids or because you're not married. And I think that is, like, it feels like it should go without being said, but it's actually such an important cornerstone piece that I think allows for full participation. And I think for me, some of the things that I'm trying to be mindful of is there are certain privileges of being single. Like, I look at my friends in my microchurch that have kids, and a lot of them have young kids right now. And as you know, Drew, kids take a lot of time and energy and investment. And I'm
so tired. I am so tired right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, vibes. And I think it's like, I have to recognize that as a single person, there is so much, like, freedom I have of, like, I get to dictate my own schedule. I can do the things I want for the most part whenever I want. I mean, like, even with my finances, I have more freedom because I'm not taking care of other people. And I think for me, I try to be really mindful of that, of part of what it means to be in a family is being responsible towards one another. And it's really important to me that, like, we collectively raise these kids together, even if, like, I don't have any kids. And so it's been a huge joy, I think, getting to be, like, I get to be a call for, like, school pickups sometimes when parents aren't available. Or a few weekends ago, like, most of the little girls in our microchurch did a sleepover at my house. And it's like, I get to do those things and, spend that time, spend the resources, and it doesn't feel like, I guess, like, if we put it on a paper, it's a cost, but for me, it's like, no, it's a joy. And it's so important to me as a single person, not just to hoard my time and hoard my resources and say, well, this is a life I chose, so these are the things I get to do, and it's my privilege, and I have to, like, protect that. But instead, it's like, well, no, like, when I think about this life stage I'm in and the freedom I have, like, that freedom is for something bigger than myself, and it's for our shared life, and it's really important to be mindful of that. And then I think there are other things where it's like, there are hardships. Like, I'm not very handy, and I always joke that, like, if I were ever to get married, I'm like, it's really just because I'm like, I need to be married to someone handy, so I, like, could get things fixed around my house without paying someone to do it. But I
sorry,
just
I'm dead.
like I'm like I don't know, like that feels like the biggest win of marriage for me. So if anyone's handy out there,
Yeah, you don't need a dating app. You're just gonna
no,
like
I'm
walk
just like
walk the aisles of Home Depot.
yeah, it's literally like what's that app that like help TaskRabbit? I'm like I'm gonna find my husband through TaskRabbit. Like, can you fix my house, please? But also don't bother me. I think like that's been actually really lovely in our microchurch is like there are things I'm like I need help with or like I like am not good at and other people and it's interesting because I work actually right now a lot of my work with my counseling clients have been talking about people that long for a partner and also talk about just the things they feel like they miss out on because and including ease and efficiency and help and having a go-to person to rely on and I guess it's interesting because I'm like I guess I don't have like a go-to person to rely on because I don't have a partner and at the same time I don't really feel like I'm missing out too much on that because I feel very much I can ask people in my microchurch for help and they don't make me feel like a burden like last week
Yeah.
at microchurch I was like the timer of my dryer is broken and I have no idea if this is like a hard job and if I should like pay somebody to like for hundreds of dollars to come out and look at it or if it's a pretty easy fix and like there's a couple guys in our microchurch that are very handy and they're like no like you should look at this you should consider this like let me think about like how I can research that for you and I think there's stuff like that to me feel like so like I feel cared for I feel
That's
seen
cool.
I feel like it's really important and I think about we had this discussion a few weeks ago at our microchurch that there was a person who's also a single woman who was like you know when it's your birthday a lot of her siblings are married like and their family celebrations of birthdays are really about like the little kids in their families the grandchildren right and it's like well like who celebrates your birthday and it's like well there's not a lot because it's like they don't have a partner that like celebrates their birthday or whatever. And I think there's something to our shared ritual in our microchurch where every person's birthday we sit around the table and we share what we love and appreciate about them from this past year. And it's like there's some community rhythms that make sure I think that like if you don't have a built-in person, I'm putting that in quotes, that like the community like is still seeing you and caring for you and you're valuable. You're not just like super valuable because you have this person that's supposed to like adore you. And I think that feels really important to me and I know is so sustaining of like, I just don't feel like I'm missing out on a lot because I feel like so many of my, like, my emotional and like physical needs are really cared for and like prioritized by this group of people who I'm trying to follow Jesus with. And even fun things like last night I went to play video games with Jeremy in our microchurch, who's married, and his wife does not enjoy playing video games. So she literally, when I got there, was like, "You guys have fun," and like was like, "I'm gonna read a book. Goodbye." And I think there's something to that of like this true fellowship, this true deep friendship that goes across like the normal bounds of hierarchy, and I think even too like it's not only like hurtful to single people when this narrative of like your partner's supposed to be your person that you fulfills everything in your life and then like single people feel like they're missing out, but I also think what a burden like for like married people to feel like my partner has to fulfill everything, all my wants, needs, desires, interests, and like if they don't do
So
that then
good.
you know then like what else is there? And
Yeah,
it's like no,
yeah.
like when you have a deep thriving community, surely like your partner doesn't meet you in all of your interests, but I'm sure somebody in your community probably does, you know, like, and you can do those things with that person instead, or those people instead of like needing your partner to like fulfill everything, I guess, to me. So I hope that that kind of paints a picture, at least for me, the
Can
value.
can I ask a follow-up question? I would be
Yeah.
fascinated, like you're talking a lot about life. I would be let's just talk about like a time you gather. Do you ever feel like because I know this has been true in some spaces I've been in, probably mistakes I've made. Do you feel like when people talk about their faith, they always see it through the lens of being married or being a parent? Or do you feel like faith can be talked about in broader terms that you don't feel like an outsider just like everybody else in the group's talking about, you know, their relationship to faith through the lens of being maybe in a married relationship or with kids.
Yeah.
And I can't relate to those struggles. And so there feels like a chasm here. Or do you feel like your microchurch does a good job talking about spirituality in a way that's inclusive
Yeah,
of
that's such a good
everyone's?
question. Yeah, I mean, I do think our microchurch does an incredible job at having, like, talking about faith communally, but not in, like, the only context is like marriage or being a parent. Whereas I think like, I've been in churches where it's like, we're doing an 8-week series on healthy marriages. And it's like, well, cool, I'm not married. So I guess this doesn't count for me for 8 weeks. Like, and it is like, I actually think when you were asking that question, I feel like the single people in our group bring up the kids overtly, maybe more than some of our parents in our
that's
gathering
cool.
times.
Yeah.
And I think part of that's just like personality. Like a lot of us have like really love kids and like are passionate about them, and maybe like in our gathering times, the parents are like, "I'm with my kids all the time. Like I don't want to talk about them." But I think there is something to people are very vulnerable about their marriages and where they're at, and I think very human. But I don't think that marriage or like parenting are the centering point of our community.
Okay.
They're important parts of these people who are whole human beings.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to that feeling really important to me. So like, yeah, like it's like I never feel weird when people bring up parenting or marriage, because it doesn't feel like our microchurch is oriented towards like, well, you're a parent, so you're now like an echelon above. Like, and it's like, I think I told you this. It was funny when we went on a retreat a few weekends ago as a network, and there was like the staffer at the camp that like prayed that God would protect the marriages and parents. And I think there's like something to that did feel exclusive of like, okay, I guess God doesn't protect single people. Like that doesn't matter if you don't have kids or you're not married.
Yeah.
You don't need protection. And I think like why that stood out to me is like, cause I never feel that way in our microchurch. Like I never feel that way.
That's so good.
And I think that's such a gift, like I've never felt excluded because of what I don't have or what I'm not living right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I asked that question because I think, for so many people, I don't know if we're always cognizant of the fact that like we're meaning making machines. And so we're constantly viewing everything through the lens of meaning making and identity. And so I think for so many people, there's so much of their identity is built on a marital relationship or being a parent. And so like to be able to like take a step back, not that those obviously, because that's such a huge part of your life, it is going to, color some of how you see faith in life and your relationship with God, but to never be able to talk about that, about life or faith outside of that, I think could be really damaging. And so I was just interested to hear from your experience if that was the case, and maybe something for us. Maybe if you're in a microchurch or a more of a diverse space, that's a thought you've never had before, and maybe something to,
I think that's a really good point. But I guess like let's throw it to you, because I do think like in some ways you are the like stereotypical like you're married, you're a man, you've been in ministry, and so for you, as you've made this turn into like shared life and microchurch community, what do you think you've had to consider or change or just like live into to be able to create and participate fully in this type of community?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like I think the older I get, the more I realize that like I just have like a deep desire for familial type realities in microchurch life or just any church life. And I think a lot of it was, I think I might have shared in the past, like my very first church experience was at a really small church in Southern Indiana where my parents were. And because it wasn't that big, the church very much like operated like a family. And I just felt like I had, we were hours away from my biological my extended family and my grandparents. And so I just felt like so many different people adopted me. One of them was a couple that was never even able to have their own kids. And it just like, I even got to go back and, as an adult and perform the funeral for the husband when he passed away, because, he saw me so much as his own kin in a way, even though we weren't, really. And so I think like, and in fact, I think I've often, when I've run into other church hurt or experiences, I've clung to some of those earliest memories where it seemed like the church was so beautiful. And so I think when I think about church life, that's often what I like deeply, deeply desire is this mosaic of people from different backgrounds and life stages and experiences that are all caring for each other and are there for each other and are just doing life together, in a myriad of ways. And so, yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, yes, I am stereotypical, but I think probably a little bit different, that I'm just not looking for, I have been in very destructive spaces that have
Mm-hmm.
been, we can only be like, our group can only be with people in the exact same, like affinity as us, or it
Yeah.
turns into like a boys club
Mm-hmm.
mentality that's, exclusive and just doesn't seem to work. Or like we're talking about, carry over some of the, weird rules and
Mm-hmm.
legalism from some of the institutional church that just creates distrust among everybody, and that you're just constantly, you're not able to ever really, be family, because you're so busy wondering if you're breaking some weird rule that's going to
Mm-hmm.
get you in trouble. And so like I've never wanted that. So I think for me, like I deeply love just being able to step in and have a myriad of experiences. And I personally, I think that's why I was even asking some of those questions. I have a high degree of like, even though I am married and have kids, like I don't like, I love being a dad and I love being a husband. And anyone who knows me, like I've reoriented a lot of my life, especially around being a dad, to be there for the formative experiences. And so that my
Mm-hmm.
kids, my daughters can know that I'm there for them.
Yeah.
But I don't derive all of my self-worth or identity from that. And so when I start talking about faith, like I actually even feel that when I'm in like spaces where all anybody wants to talk about is being a parent or being a spouse. And I'm like, so there's so much more to who I am than just those things.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think I'm on like high alert for that. And like, I love being in spaces where they're like almost what you were describing is happening. And so because of that, like I love like, one of my first iteration of the microchurch that we started here is like multiplied. So things are a little bit messier now, but there was a single woman in that group who's still, in one of the other microchurches, and is like such a dear friend that like our girls call her aunt. And or
Mm-hmm.
I should say I'm in New England now, so aunt. I got
Aunt.
an
I was
aunt.
like, ant is
Yeah,
so.
yeah,
Ugh.
aunt.
Ant is
Yeah.
a bug.
But she's just such a huge part of our like, has done so many different things with us, with my wife and I, but with our whole family. And we even have like a 3-person book club where she's over once a month, and our girls just love getting to stay up late to get to talk to her and show her. They
Mm-hmm.
have so many stuffed animals that she's given them over the years that they
Mm-hmm.
like cling to in their bunk beds, and they have to bring them out to show her that they still have them. And
That's so precious.
yeah, it's really cool. So and my life would be less rich if she wasn't in it. And I
Mm-hmm.
love that I'm able to have like do church in a way that like that's not weird or uncomfortable. And that I don't stop and like couch that relationship like, well, on what terms can I be friends with
Mm-hmm.
her, or get to know her. And so yeah, it's I know I have a number of inherent biases as I step into any space, but I really do love like having a mismatched family. And
Yeah.
I think any space that I'm in, I deeply, deeply desire that, and it makes it richer for all of us.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll get into this more, but I also think just knowing you, I've told this story before. I was like when I first met you, Drew, I was in such like a wounded space and had just been like was very wary, I think, of anyone, especially like a white man that was associated with like ministry. And I was like, one of the first green flags was that you were willing to meet with me over coffee and like not include your wife. And I love Bree, she's
Yeah, yeah,
amazing.
yeah,
But I
yeah.
was just like, oh, like you're not inherently assuming I'm gonna be a homewrecker. Like, that's good. Like I like
Yeah,
that, you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
And I think like it again, it kind of feels like silly, but it's just like I've been so used to that in those spaces, and I think you do that so well of just like really treating people as human beings, and
Hmm.
it's like your family is beautiful and lovely, and I also think like that's one of my favorite things too is like I've gotten to know Brie like almost like as a separate person outside of just like the Thurmans, you know,
Yeah,
whereas I
yeah.
think I've encountered a lot of like couples in ministry where it's like I feel like the only way I can really access
Mm,
them is like knowing them as a couple because like of like all of the unspoken like oh, like
Weird.
this is
Yeah.
like a boundary, but it's like a boundary that makes me feel less human.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
No, no, I think that's so true. And I mean, thankfully, like, I mean, getting into the weeds here, like, I didn't meet my wife in Bible college. And so
Mm-hmm.
she's been like, she never liked that. Like, like, nothing was, I mean, it would actually probably even be better in the future to have her come up and talk about this on a podcast of just, she hated being Drew's wife.
Yeah.
Like, and it's not like she's some, not that it would be bad. She's not like a super, like her whole life is like, how do I climb the ladder corporately? So it's not like she was, it's more of just like, there's a lot of me that is not encapsulated in just me performing some institutional ministry function.
Right.
And so, yeah, like it's so wonderful. We talk about this all the time that like church now is done in a way that she doesn't have to, like, she's allowed to be independent of me, her own, like we actually, and I think this is actually really cool. We actually, one of our other microchurch spaces you and I are in, talks about like being seen apart from our spouses
Yeah.
as like our own faith journey. And there's a number of theological issues that Brie and I disagree on. And I'm not like forcing her to be where I'm at on those. Like we can hold those things up in tension, and we're very open about that in our microchurch. Like there's
Yeah.
times where Brie and I stand on different things. And I think that's really healthy for everybody to see that like,
Yeah.
just because we're married doesn't mean that we have to she has to live in my shadow, so to speak. She can shine. And I think on the flip side, the only other thing I would add before we dive in deeper to this is just, I love that my girls, like, I say this all the time, like, and I think you were a preacher's kid, and so I think
Yeah.
you learned this as well. But like, I think I didn't realize how much of a performative spirituality I became normative for me, because especially in a lot of small rural towns where it was like, no matter what place I went, I was the preacher's kid, and there were certain expectations in my conduct and character that had to follow that. And I just really love that my girls, like their version of church, even when they like walk in the church door, like, well, we don't have church, but like I walked in the church doors and I was thinking about that. Any space they're in, it's so familial. Like they see people who are, in essence, cousins and aunts and uncles and all these other things that are, it's just so beautiful. And it is this weird mosaic of people, both in our microchurch, but even when our network gets together, people that they love being around. And I just love the fact that they're able to go on their own spiritual journey apart from living in the shadow of my vocation, and that's not going to color how they have to think about following Jesus. So, yeah. So we could talk about that forever. And I think we've talked about talking, but I would love moving this conversation along just beyond our own perspectives. I think I share this a lot. There's one of my favorite little books. It's called A Fellowship of Difference from Scott McKnight. He talks a lot about the fact that he uses the metaphor that the church should be like a salad bowl. And he says, an improper way to have a salad is to have all the different ingredients separate. And he says a good salad is thrown into a bowl and mixed and tossed. And that's really what the church was from its very inception. And he has this really cool piece I'm going to read and then ask you some questions off of it. But he says, understand that these early Christians did not meet in churches and sit apart from one another in pews, and then when the music ended in their chariots, go home. No, their churches were small and they met in homes or house churches. A recent study by a British scholar has concluded that if the Apostle Paul's house churches were composed of about 30 people, this would have been their approximate makeup. There would have been a craft worker in whose home they would have met, along with his wife and children and a couple of servants or slaves, a female domestic slave, a dependent relative, some tenants with families and slaves and dependents also living in the same home or rented homes, some family members of a household who himself did not participate in the house church, a couple of slaves whose owners did not attend, some freed slaves who did not participate in the church, a couple of homeless people, a few migrant workers renting small rooms in the home. Add in to this the mix of some Jewish folks and perhaps an enslaved prostitute, and we see how many different tastes were in a typical house church under Roman occupation. Men and women, citizens and freed slaves who had no legal rights, Jews and Gentiles, people from all moral walks of life, and perhaps most notably, people in elite classes all the way down to social scale to homeless people. Obviously, as I'm reading that, there's no way that all these people saw everything in common or agreed on everything. They were coming from all different kinds of life stages, backgrounds, obviously some social settings there that we don't have in our own culture, but helps us understand just the complexity of life. McKnight goes on, the Christian life is not just about how I am doing as an individual, but especially about how we are doing as a church and how and what I am doing in the mix of others called the church, which is really beautiful. I think this helps color the lens, like in Acts 16, for instance, when Lydia, this wealthy merchant, that says her whole entire household was baptized. We're probably talking about a smattering of people that were grouped economically, people who probably worked for her, maybe some servants or slaves that worked for her, all maybe some relatives, all coming to faith in Jesus. Really, really cool. So with all this said, why don't you think we see more of this sort of diversity in Christian communities, especially smaller Christian communities? We know a lot about small groups in the church. I don't think a lot of us be comfortable with this sort of like a cross section of people meeting in a home or a third space often. So why do you think, what do you think's the difference between what we're reading about in the first century and what we're experiencing now?
Yeah, that's I love the picture you painted about the early church. And I think, well, one, coming from, more traditional paradigms, a lot of times small groups are affinity groups, right? So it is just more built on common interests or common life stage. And I don't think that that's wrong per se, but I do think there is a certain type of formation that happens when your walk with Jesus is oriented around commonality only, or commonality primarily is probably a better way to put that. And I do think that it's also just a lot of times in our programmed kind of like small groups, like Christian communities, there's a huge aspect of that where we are only gathering to do like a specific study or like to do a thing together, right?
Yep.
And it's not about shared life and mutuality. And again, this podcast isn't really about like leadership stuff, but I also think that's a part of it, is like when a lot of times in these other types of structures, there's a clear idea of leadership, who's in charge, what that means, how people are to behave in relation to the power structure. And all of those things, I think, really impact the way that people can participate. And it's way messier when you're going for a mutuality and shared life and not just we're coming together once a week to do this one specific thing together or to read this book together, blah, blah, blah. And again, it's not that it's wrong. I just don't think it's enough. Like I think it really truncates the way that we can be formed in the likeness of Jesus when we are doing, like, sharing our whole selves, our whole lives, not like it's the school pickup and we're reading the Bible and we're talking about our politics and we're talking about, like this funny thing that happened in our week, and that comes across like the whole cross section of the week, and not just, on Wednesday nights we meet and we're reading this book and we all are in the same like social class and we all like playing pickleball, whatever it is, like I just think that, like, I get that affinity groups are like probably like the easiest route to pull people together, but I think that's part of the problem, right? It's the easiest route, and ease does not necessarily bring spiritual maturity. Yep. And I think mutuality is a huge part of spiritual maturity, and mutuality is difficult to cultivate. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Well, you hit on the first. I think a lot of our church spaces are very pragmatic. And so because of that, you're creating weird social constructions based off of that pragmatism and achieving outputs. I mean, I think honestly, like, we can couch this actually in practitionership. We're talking a lot about microchurch life. I just think the reality is that church, I just don't think most of our churches in North America are very good, especially, I mean, I should say, especially in more white evangelical spaces, of not just catering to upwardly affluent middle class people. And so I think the reality is for a lot of us, we just don't do life with anybody that's different than that. And so we don't know people. And I think we should always be asking ourselves the question, like, does my microchurch look like my neighborhood? Like when I, like if I walk a few blocks in any direction from where our microchurch is huddling, like there's probably a good cross section of life of people of different, social statuses, different, life phases, different genders, different, all different things. Is that represented in my microchurch? And then I need to be asking myself some big questions. Like, if that's not the case, why is that not the case? And I think we need to do a better job of building relationships beyond the bounds of our microchurches too, that represents the true diversity of the places that we do life and where we meet. And it's going to probably make us feel uncomfortable, and it's going to probably push us outside of some of the constructs that we've known or we've operated in exclusively. But I think that's a really good thing. And so I think it's a both sides of the coin thing. Like, our microchurches should start looking like this. We need to learn to operate better in our microchurches, but we also need to be asking ourselves the question, like, if there's nobody that's different, if there is no difference in my microchurch, that's a problem in of itself.
Yep.
And we need to be asking some big questions about how well am I doing life? And then am I, like you're saying, providing the kind of mutuality where everyone can feel like they can take part in this? And they're stepping into a space that feels like it's for them as well. So, yeah, I think this is really great. I think I want us to go a step even deeper, though, if we are to embrace that. So let's say we start being more missional, allowing the sort of diversity of gender and relational status and life stage to happen. What are we going to have to unlearn then as we operate together? So you talked really beautifully about your microchurch, and I'm sure there's people that are listening like, I've been in spaces like that, and it's not that beautiful, and I feel very uncomfortable, or I feel invisible, and I feel unseen. And so from your perspective, what sorts of things do we need to unlearn as our microchurches, and are there operating defaults that we have that are really unhelpful to the kind of flourishing that you described at the beginning?
Yeah, I do think that, like, part of it is we have to really look at and be mindful of how we see other people with different, that are different genders from us or different life stage from us, and actually be aware. I feel like I sound like such a therapist, but I'm like, I feel like it always starts with awareness. Like, and I do think there's something too, like, okay, I think why my microchurch feels like such a good space for me is because I feel like my microchurch understands that just because I'm a single person doesn't mean like I don't have needs, or like that all my time can just be like eaten up. Like I felt like that in other church spaces where they're like, you're single, so that means like you can do everything, because what else do you have to do with your life? Like, you should be volunteering at everything. Yeah. Who cares? Like, you don't have anything else going on because you don't have kids and you're not married, so your priority is volunteering here.
So what you're saying, your goals for getting married would be a fixer-upper who allowed you to just not have to do more institutional program work.
Yes. I'm like, that is all I want in a husband.
Two motivation.
Obviously the only goals, only things that really matter. Yeah. But I do think like that's part of like our assumptions about other people's life stages and what that means. I think what like has naturally happened in our microchurches is like we really know what's going on in other people's lives. So there's no like assumption of like, oh, you're single, so that means that you don't have anything hard going on and I can just ask you to do this or that. But the asks are always coming from, when we ask things of one another, having a full context of who this person is, what they're going through, like what are their passions, what don't they like what are they capable of. And I think also everyone is oriented towards a sense of responsibility beyond just their own little world. And I think that's like a tension to live in. And life stages change and life changes, right? Like there's times where something hard happens and it's like no one could be prepared for that. But I just love, like, I'm overheard, there was a single person in our microchurch this week that just shared some like things that were happening that were hard for them. And one of the married men in our microchurch, I heard pull them aside and just share, I know our family is really busy right now, but if you need something, like we're here, like we're here to help. And I just think there's something to that of like having a greater sense of responsibility beyond yourself. And then I do think it's like, I think men and women need to examine how they think about women. Like, and what have you been told by society of what it means to be a woman, the expectations of a woman, and then especially the expectations of a woman in religious spaces. I think that's something that a lot of us have to unlearn. I just think, like, I remember this is like a really yucky moment from my past, but I remember there was like some like random Christian article that like wanted to interview me and be like, how do you think your like identity as a woman has like impacted your role in ministry? And at that phase of my life, I was just so like, I have more privilege than other women that I see. So I was like, I don't know, I think I'm pretty fine. But while like really being in a pretty oppressive space where it was like, there's a lot of things I couldn't do, but because I could do more than what I saw some of my other female peers being able to accomplish, I was like, this is good enough. And I think there's a lot of that of, we are not mindful, I think a lot of us, about the way women come into religious spaces, spiritual spaces, and like have experienced power asserted over them. This idea of submission that I think is very, very much intertwined in church spaces for women. I think like all of us have to be really mindful of like what that means and what that looks like. And I think I think I've been so lucky to get to share life and church with a lot of men who do not make me feel like my role is to submit, and are very mindful of the power they wield just because they are men, and the way they talk to me and the way they talk with me, eliciting a sense of respect and mutuality, and just like, you're my peer, for me has been so healing and life-changing. I mean, I've told you that, Drew, that it's like even in our Renaissance network, I'm in a group chat with 3 boys. And I think like it would be so easy to just feel like I shouldn't say things or I can't say things because I'm a woman. And it's like, some of those things are not overt and they're not on purpose. But I think what's been really awesome is I think the way that a lot of the men I interact with in church context now really carry themselves with a sense of thoughtfulness and mindfulness of women, and just like how easy it is to make someone feel less than, even if you don't mean to. And so I think that kind of posturing, like, it's like, I think a lot of times people come in with good intentions and it's not overt. But like those kinds of little things are important to unlearn, because I think they're just so built into the water of society of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, and the same thing of what it means to be a man and woman in church, if that makes sense.
No, that's so good. Yeah. And I don't want to really add that much to that, because I'm on a learning journey and I think I get it right sometimes. And I think there's a lot of spaces that I'm in, I'm trying to work on making sure that I don't operate with some of the same biases sometimes that I think I have, and some of the ways that I think everybody should think this way, or everyone is going to operate from the same default. So I'm constantly trying to do a better job of being aware, asking more questions. I would say the only thing I would add is it's very interesting to me. Like I think there's so many cultural shifts that are taking place. That I've actually been in some spaces in some of our microchurches that, it's almost spoken over men, like I kind of in joking ways sometimes, that like expectations of like traditional, like, you don't know this or you won't do this because you're a man. And I think it's been really helpful sometimes to break through that. I think of a time, like, it was kind of funny, like someone asked some advice on like a cooking thing, and all the men in our group thread were the first ones to respond. And a couple of the women were laughing, like, we love this so much that like, that the stereotypes are breaking, or like when it's time to like, if we ever need to separate and watch kids, that we're making sure that everyone's taking a part in that. And that, that some of us as dads or men in the group, that we're sharing that burden, and that we're not just forcing, kind of these traditional roles on everybody and just assuming that that's how we should operate. And so I think there's some things like that, but I have still been in some spaces that ironically have almost wanted to force or like jokingly or cynically like expected nothing more of us. Yeah. And I think it's really important to go that extra mile to say, like, we want to show all the time in the way that we serve and the things that we do that we are truly a family. There is true mutuality here, and we're not going to settle for some of that cynicism. We want to push back and create the kind of beautiful community that you're talking about in very intentional ways. And again, every microchurch is probably going to look different, but I don't think I've always done a perfect job, but I think there's so much growth there. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to, I think you're not going to share this story, but I want to share it because I think for me, the impact of it, and I think it just really also captures like this idea of unlearning. Like, I think sometimes we hear that word and it feels like, I don't know, like charged, like you got to deprogram your brains. And it's like, it's not so much that, but it's more just like being mindful and being open to like, what might I be missing? And, a few weeks ago we had just on our retreat at our network, and I just love that you gave me a call and we were just talking about a bunch of different things. But one thing that you said to me was just like, hey, I noticed when we were talking about this one thing, me, Jace, and Fab all said we thought this was really good, and you didn't really say anything. And I just want to be mindful that like our perspective as men, like that maybe that's not how you felt, but I also want to make sure you didn't feel like bulldozed of like, we already all said this, and like we're men, so like you just felt like you couldn't say anything, which like that's like, I think why that struck me so much is like, one, no one's, especially no man, has ever like said that to me in a church space, but two, it's like that is not even the context of our relationship or friendship. Like, I never feel like I can't say something with you guys, but the fact that you still went out of your way to say, hey, did you feel something? You just didn't say it. Especially because it's like a group of guys being like, ha ha ha, we thought this was great, I like, to me, was so impactful, healing, and it's like, I just wish more women could experience that from men in church, of just like, we value your voice, and it's like, even if we have a great relationship, we're being mindful that like there are still always overtones of what people say is appropriate for women to do and be and say, especially in church settings. And like, to me, one, thank you, but two, it's like that's what I think captures unlearning for me. It's like, it's not about like, oh, now I've subscribed to this type of thinking and I'm ascendant and I'm just gonna get it. It's more just like, no, like, is there enough mutuality and trust in our community and our relationships that we can keep checking in on one another and saying like, do you have what you need? Do you have what you need to thrive? Do you have what you need to really show up in all that God made you to be? And like, because that is what church is about. It's like about being able to fully participate and be seen. And I think like, to me, I just want people to like get the sense of that, of like, we're not approaching unlearning as like, go back to school and make sure you have the right thoughts. Like that's not what it's about.
No, well, I think, and I feel embarrassed that you're even sharing that story, because I feel like I have still so much work to do. And I think it is. It's just, I love what you were saying earlier of just stopping to ask more questions and just not assume that my perspective or my goals are normative for everybody. And and we're not even talking about the complexity of culture on top of this that adds a whole nother level of difficulty. I was just on a call this last week with Yoon Strasser, and she was sharing a story of, in Hawaiian culture, being married is really, really important and adds status. So like, when there has been women in their church who don't think that they are able to be leaders, even if they see mutuality, because or the elevation of women, because the women they saw elevated were married women. And so there was a whole nother level of like, there was people disqualifying themselves. And so I think there's like, we need to stop and ask all kinds of questions, because I think there's so many underlying assumptions. And I know I'm going to beat a dead horse, but this is why we do so much social contract stuff. And I talk to microchurch leaders across, or people who want to start microchurches all across the country. And it's always the thing that I start with. And it sounds so simple. And I send the document and I'm almost embarrassed how naked the document is, because there's not that much to it.
Yeah.
But there's so much to it. There's not a lot on the paper, but there's so much to what's behind it. Because if you start the community centering, no matter who that culture is, whatever the culture is, or whoever that person is, if you start by centering a dominant leader's perspective, the rest of the group will always be stunted. And we have to do a really good job from our inception of saying, how do we value everyone's perspective, allow everyone give safety from the very beginning to speak up, to say what they need from the group, what would be guardrails that if they get crossed, they're not going to be a part of it. And then check up on ourselves and be honest of saying not one person can come up with it. We all came up with this. And how are we doing? And sometimes there's going to be seasons where it's you know what, we need to get back to some things that we're not doing very good.
Yeah.
But all that to say, I feel I fail at this more than I get it right. But I just think hopefully that's why I stop and ask those questions, because then I get embarrassed. It's I was mad at myself. Why didn't I catch myself in the moment? I just spoke first, and I should have asked a question first and asked you. And I just assumed, I thought this was awesome. I felt like I could speak up. And then and then I got in the car and I was mad at myself. And I was I should have, why haven't I gotten to a place of growth where I'm asking the question before I'm just asserting that my perspective was reality? And I think we can all grow. We're all on that curve of growing, of how do we ask more questions and just make sure and check in that people feel like they can speak up, and they're not getting railroaded because, oh, wait, I'm in a group of 15 people and 10 of them spoke up right away and said this was great. Well, it wasn't great for me. And does the community allow me to speak up for that as well? So, I know we're already way probably past the time we need to get, but I still want to say this, I think we're getting there, but and I think you did a really good job at the beginning describing it, but for you, what sort of beauty gets fostered when we embrace this sort of mindset in our communities? How do you think, I think there's some people when they hear these conversations, it's oh, you're just being so, progressive, and you're just, this makes you feel good. But I really want us to say, we're not just doing this to sound like we're trendy, or that we're just speaking into something that maybe there is some more cultural awareness happening, or some reckoning that's taking place. But we obviously already read that this is what the early church looked like. It was actually what was some of the early church strength. But from your perspective, more than just being trendy, what kind of beauty gets fostered when we embrace this sort of mindset, and how are we better for it?
Yeah. Well, one, I just think the way we get to experience God when every single person in our spiritual community actually gets to fully represent him in the ways that they've been designed to is just, it just doesn't compare. I always share the story of one of my favorite moments in our microchurch in the last few years was there was someone that came and just asked how do you guys know that your faith just isn't confirmation bias? And I loved that it was there's such mutuality and different perspectives and different life stages and different genders represented in this conversation, and every person shared about why they still cling to their faith and how their faith looks in that phase, right? And it's there wasn't one person that stood up and gave a presentation on apologetics, and it's this person that asked the question got to hear so many different perspectives, so many different experiences of God that were tailored to a lot of different variables, right? And I think that is the strength of the church, is that there's no one person on the planet that can fully imitate and image Jesus and that be compelling to every single person. And we don't have to be that. There's so much freedom that we don't have to do that, because God is at work in the world. And part of the way God is at work in the world is how he has worked in and built us. And so I think there's something about the way I can express the love of Jesus and be like him as a single person, as a woman, as a Chinese immigrant, that other people on my microchurch, like can't, and there are ways that they can because of their life phase and experiences and race and gender that like I can't. And I think that's, and I think the other part I would just want to highlight of the beauty of this is too is like I sit in a counseling room for 12 hours a week, and I hear so many people talking about how lonely they feel, and that they do not feel like even when they have friends, they do not feel like they can actually share the deep hardships of their lives. And I dig into that over and over and over. We know there's a loneliness epidemic in our country. And I think the church is the solution for that when we are really living and following Jesus together. And I just like, the thing that comes to mind is, this past year for my mom's birthday, my mom's so important to me. And I wasn't around because I was on a business trip. And I felt so bummed out because like she told me, she's like, I don't really have plans. I think I'll probably just like hang out by myself. And my mom's so extroverted. So it just like really made me so sad. And again, like I don't have a partner. So I was like, I can't just be like, hey, this person I'm with, you need to go do something for my mom. But I texted the people in my microchurch and just said like, can like some of y'all like come hang out with my mom or do something with her for her birthday? And it's like everyone responded, and like there's a couple in our microchurch that like took her to a family party with them and like fed her lobster and like and it was just like I'm so grateful that like I have people that I can fully be vulnerable with about my needs, and also that will show up for me. And I think like that's so much of what I hear is like so many people in our country, in our neighborhoods, probably feel like they don't even want to risk asking for their needs because they don't think people are going to show up for them. So being the church can truly be good news for our neighbors. Like loving and being in like thick and like embedded community is such good news to our neighbors that they can be vulnerable with their needs, and their needs are going to be met because they're really actually going to be known and seen. And I think like that's like what I want to paint for people that are like thinking about this journey or are on this journey and maybe discouraged, that like this like it feels basic, but creating like this community where there's mutuality, where we can really be ourselves as we're following Jesus, is like something that can create flourishing, not just for us, but for the people around us that might not know Christ yet.
Goodness. Just hearing you say that, I get excited. I'm in a microchurch and I'm excited. Like, yeah, I want to be a part of that. That sounds so beautiful. I would love for you to have the final word. What advice would you give for folks as we're kind of wrapping up this episode who are maybe starting these sort of communities, or maybe they have something and they're looking at their own space and say, this isn't totally what you guys are describing, and I want to lean more into this conversation?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds so simple, but like, make friends with people that don't share your life phase and gender. Like how do you really develop some of those like individualized friendships? Like, I think that's so important. So many people don't know how to be a friend. I think if church people knew were really good at being friends, I think actually that would make a huge difference. And it sounds simple. It's also kind of slow work. You can't just like make a friend tomorrow and be great friends. It comes back to some of like our theology of like slowing your pace, being mindful of where you actually are, being mindful of the people around you. You're not gonna be friends with everyone, so that's okay too. But I just would encourage people to be like, if you don't have a friend, if you're married and you don't have single friends that you're deeply embedded in life with, that's something to consider. If you're single and all your friends are your shared life stage single, you don't have like close married friends that you feel like you have access to and like they really know you, that's something to consider. If all your friends are the same gender as you and all your close friends are the same gender as you, I think you're missing out. And so I think like I would just encourage people to like kind of like audit your life, audit your friendships. Like, do you actually have diversity there? And if not, why is that? Like, what's stopping you? Why hasn't this been a priority in the past? And I do think like too, if you're already in microchurch community, like how often do you hear divergent thoughts in your gathering spaces? This is like kind of like spicy, but during the election, everybody in our microchurch shared who they voted for, which I was like, I was not expecting that. And it was all across the board, and it was like there was thick enough community to just be like, okay, like this is like why, like people talked about where they landed, how come they landed there. And I like loved that. I was like, I really know these people. We can share something as like hard as that in this kind of space, and there's enough trust there. And it's like, and we don't agree. And that's
so
okay.
good. Yeah.
You know, like, and it's like, you know, maybe you don't want to like talk about politics and you're like, let's all share our political bit. Like, that's not what I'm saying. But I do think it's like, how often do you have very divergent thoughts, and can your community handle difference and those shared opinions, and just live in that tension of like, we don't agree. That's okay. And if not, like, I think that's worth exploring.
That's so good. Well, thank you for joining us. And we hope you continue to enjoy this journey on this podcast with us. I think we're actually have seen an increase in views on our YouTube and listens. So there's more and more of you that are finding us and listening to us, which is really great. If you could review us, obviously that would help others find us. If you want to find out more about the Renaissance Network, from our microchurches to future cohorts that you could join, head to our website, wearerenaissance.org. And I'm going to give Christine the final goodbye because she says it's so great.
Bye.